The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome to another episode of Scary Stories with Kalila. I am here with my co-host, Allan Gilbreath,
Hello.
live from Memphis. Hey, Allan, how's it going?
It's a lovely day, finally. It's very nice.
It's a beautiful day. It's very cool and crisp outside.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our special All Saints Day, Day of the Dead. After Halloween, what do? Everybody's going to the cemetery. So let's talk a little bit about those cemeteries, because those can be scary places. Now, that being said, I want to clarify, I do not believe for 1 second that our loved ones are hanging out in the cemeteries. They're gone. They went through the light. They're wherever they're at. They're gone. However, there are spiritual vagabonds, as Billy Roberts likes to call them, who do reside in the cemeteries. There's guardian spirits. There's all sorts of things that you probably don't want to run into in the cemeteries. And we happen to have a couple of cemeteries here where it seems that they really are the intersection of our world and the world beyond, places where we've seen actual, complete apparitions appear and then vanish. So we're going to be talking about some of that. In fact, Allan, I sent you some photographs. And I wanted to get your opinion. In fact, the first one I sent you, the guy by the big tree, that, of course, obviously is not a cemetery. That's in City Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I took that picture. It was not a picture that was taken by someone else and sent to me. I took the picture. That little group of people you see in the picture, they had contracted me to get on their van and give them a tour. So I was kind of a step-on guide. So it was a small group of people. I took them there. I got them out. I told them the story there. And they asked me to take their photograph with a lady's camera, with her phone. So I got them all together, and I had the opening there for the tree, because the significance being that is the oldest tree in City Park. They figured it out to be about 700 years old. So they wanted to have their picture taken with the tree. So there's a little bit of a gap there for the tree. And when I went to look at the picture to make sure I took it right, I asked one of the lady who gave me the camera, I said, what is your husband doing with his back turned over by the tree? Why did he walk away? And she says, no, my husband's right there. So I zoomed in a little bit, and I said, then who is that? So I kind of gave you a little zoom in of that. There is a figure with their back to the camera, facing the tree. It looks like a rather tall gentleman. He has what looks like what I would call deck shoes. You know, those tennis shoes with the really thick rubber. He was dressed very similar to the woman's husband, and he looks like he might be bald. But clearly it is a figure, and he's right by the tree. But he was not there when I took that photograph. So, Mr. Skeptic, I have to ask you, what do you think about that?
All right. Let's talk about human nature briefly. Because I have got your pair of deck shoes blown up massively.
Oh, okay.
And I want to talk about pareidolia. What is pareidolia? Pareidolia is the magical superpower of human beings to identify faces.
Right, yeah, like faces in a cloud, faces.
Well, just faces in general, because being able to read somebody's face is, well, let's face it, basic 101 survival. From the time we were...
He doesn't have a face. He has his
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. However, if you blow the tree up enough, you do get a face-like imprint on the tree slightly above where the head should have been. Much, much, much larger. But it is enough to look at it and go, okay, I see an ear, a forehead, some eyebrows, a couple of eyes, and a nose-like area. And then you have a little gap in the tree, and then you have a deep shadow, and the shadow looks remarkably like an artifact from a coat, because there are two coats over to the right-hand side and one to the left, capable of giving you that kind of shape and color. And you add a couple of sticks on the ground, and you have a pretty convincing, object or artifact on the print. So, that's the fun part. Now, the best part would be if there were 2 or 3 pictures in a row.
See, but you don't think to do that. You don't think to do it. You say.
See, that is. See, the hard part about a single still picture is we now have something anomalous. It's obviously there. And because of the unique situation in which it was shot, because of the lighting, because of the moisture, because of the people, and, I got to tell you, it's a spectacular tree.
Oh, it's an incredible tree.
Oh my gosh, this thing is absolutely massive and imposing. And of course, down there with y'all, you have the magnificent Spanish moss hanging down everywhere. This tree by itself has probably got a Scooby-Doo rating of a 6 or 7.
Yeah.
This tree just by itself is like, welcome to the swamps. The tree is magnificent.
It is.
So, this one right here, I'm going to have to throw in the anomalous artifact. It only looks like a person because there are people there to judge around it. Okay. If you had just taken this picture of the tree by itself and there weren't people to give you reference on the shapes, then you probably wouldn't have you would have never paid any attention and never would have said there's a ghost in the picture. So that's probably about the best I can say about that one.
Okay. All right. Well,
is that it's good. It's a great picture. It's a great picture. This is one of these where you really wish and this is kind of a shout out to anybody out there doing paranormal investigations. Set your camera on burst. Because what we really need to see
is and we've had people do that, and we have actual photographs where we see ecto coming up out of the water, and it comes up and you see it in stages. But I didn't send you that one because I only sent you what looked like apparitions.
Great picture though. I love the picture of just, am I, if unless you zoom in really close. But I think what catches your eye is that kind of bark pattern above the deck shoes and the legs. Okay. What caught my eye first.
Zooming in on the big computer because I didn't do that, but
yeah, when you get it really
picture.
Yeah, when you get it photoshopped in, it's not as good a ghost, but it does kick in.
Look at it.
Yeah, it does kick in your I see a face in the tree kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see a face at all. I saw a figure. But it certainly wasn't a face. Now, Where we did see a face is the photograph I sent you. There was a couple I sent you where there are people standing in front of a cemetery, and clearly there's a little wrought iron fence behind them, and behind the wrought iron fence there's a figure. There's a couple of figures, and one in particular.
Okay, this is the one with the 3 people in the bottom of the picture, or the 2 people in front of the lights?
It's the lady with her. It's a big face of the lady, and right behind her, and you can see that it's behind the fence. It looks like a little Ewok or something. It's got like a hooded creature. It's very peculiar looking. One of them, yes.
Okay, so where is my Ewok critter in this?
You can't miss it. I mean, in the picture, the woman's face is like this big, and then there's this thing behind her that almost looks like a little tiny Grim Reaper behind her.
Okay, I got you. I got you.
Hey, I got it. And then the other ones are kind of like the same cemetery, and you see little figures back in there, but that's the most prominent one. And interestingly enough, I did a show when I was doing Scariest Paranormal. I did a show with one of the tour guides who is an expert in some of the lower vibrational entities in Judaism. And this is a Jewish cemetery. And he started describing some of these entities that you might see in cemeteries.
Because once again, we were able to go into that particular cemetery. Long story, guys. I don't want to bore you with that or smack talk on this. However, we did have permission to enter that cemetery. And the interesting thing is that there would be a few different tour guides from our company, and they're at the same time, I'm Jewish. They're not. There are parts of that cemetery that I could go into and be comfortable, and they could not. There was definitely a nope, you don't belong here. And the spirits in that cemetery realized that we were all there to be respectful. However, me being Jewish meant that I gained access to parts of that cemetery that other people did not. Now, there were parts of that cemetery that none of us liked to go in because it was uncomfortable, because these spirits are very unhappy. So one of the reasons for that, as you know, Kalila, and some people don't, is that we had something here in New Orleans called Code Noir, translated as Black Code, and it dictated how our enslaved people were to be treated here. But the first thing that Code Noir said was that all Jews were to be expelled from the colony of New Orleans. And that meant that Jewish people had to hide, had to change their ways, had to change their names, as a matter of fact. There is a Jewish family that adopted our very own Louis Armstrong, who had to change their names from Karnofsky to Carno, so that they were not expelled. So these spirits are upset by that, and they're upset by some of the desecration in the cemetery, because the cemetery is open and people go in cemeteries and they do a lot of disrespectful things, and these spirits are very upset by that. My personal opinion is that when we were no longer able to enter that cemetery, the spirits really wanted to make sure that they were seen and heard by us. And so when we would pull up there, they made sure that we knew that they were there. But let's talk about that particular photograph that you're talking about. Because in that photograph, there's not only one, there are a number. There's a lot going on in there. But the one that you're talking about, for those of you that are fans of Nightmare Before Christmas, it looks like a black Oogie Boogie.
Only it's very tiny. It's a mini one. It's a mini Oogie Boogie.
No, it's I don't know. I've looked at the photograph recently. It is taller than the woman.
Well, it looks short because it's over behind that fence. If we're talking about the same photograph.
We're talking about the same photograph, and there are a number of different things in the photograph. But this is, well, yeah, obviously Oogie Boogie is huge, so it's not as big as Oogie Boogie. But that's it's not much shorter than the woman. And you're right, it is. When you look at the photograph, there's no way it was photoshopped because she's in front of the gate. You can see the figure behind the gate. You can she would have to be a master manipulator of photography. And once again, she showed us this picture right after she took this picture.
Yeah.
Which means that, yeah, she did not add it to the picture afterwards. And there's a lot going on there. And so my fellow tour guides and I started talking about what this might be. And one of the things that we came up with was that it might be a Dybbuk. Let's talk about Dybbuks. Dybbuks are not really demons. They are detached spirits or they're detached souls. And they can either possess a living person or they can attach themselves to a soul that has lost its way. Dybbuks are inherently evil. They are mean. But because whenever we have good and evil, there's so the Dybbuks are the evil side, and then we have Ebors. Ebors are positive spirits that possess a living person. So, for instance, a Dybbuk will attach itself to a soul and do evil. An Ebor will attach itself to a soul because they have some unfinished business and they want to do some sort of good deed. In Hebrew, that's called a mitzvah. And an Ibor is something that will attach, complete this task, and then move on. So what we came up with is that might be a Dybbuk. And for those of you that are fans of wonderful shows like Ghost Adventures, there's something called a Dybbuk box, which there's an object called a Dybbuk box. It's actually a wine cabinet, and you can trap the Dybbuk in there, and then if you open it, well, then the Dybbuk comes out. And there's one in particular that was sold on eBay, and everybody that had it had something bad happen to them. Of course, they did open it because they said, well, we want to make sure that the Dybbuk's still in there, or whatever it was. Curiosity killed the cat. Satisfaction brought it back. And so they opened up the box, and then obviously the Dybbuk was free and followed them around, whoever owned the box. Shadim are either considered the descendants of the serpent or descendants of Adam and Lilith. For those of you who don't know, Adam had a first wife. Her name was Lilith. Thanks to the fact that Lilith was expelled or left Eden, she became not only the queen of the demons, or she was considered the first vampire, which is interesting. So in Mesopotamian and in Jewish folklore, Lilith is considered the first vampire, and one of the ways that she would get back at people was by sneaking into their homes and eating their babies. Yum. So either the Shadim are descendants of the serpents, coming from the first serpent who, produced sin in the Garden of Eden, or they are the descendants of Adam and Lilith. They have the feet of a rooster. They cause sickness and misfortune. They also follow the dead, and they fly around graves, which means that what we see in this picture might be one of the Shadim. And then we have Mazikeen. If you're a fan of the show Lucifer, yes, Mazikeen from Lucifer. They are damagers or those that cause harm. It would make sense, going back to that picture once again, that if there are souls that are hovering over the cemetery, and there are people that are going into that cemetery doing things that they ought not do, disrespecting, or bringing in the law. Now, in Judaism, we are very, very, very sensitive to people doing pagan type things in a Jewish realm. So it's not beyond it's not beyond thinking that if people were going in there and leaving offerings to gods, I know that law, not gods, they're spirits, that are not from the Jewish faith, that might bring a Dybbuk in.
Imagine it's the year 2020. With so many podcasts, streams, and interesting stations, you've finally found your paranormal hotspot. We want to personally invite you to join the discussion by tuning in and listening to The Seance Room. With all new and returning guests, intriguing investigative explorations, and scintillating conversations with the beyond. Welcome to The Seance Room. Haunted airwaves, conversations with the beyond, chilling messages from spirits and odd interviews. The spirits are going live.
Now this one is cool. I like the image, but I think most of the image is actually the heavier bars that I see behind the fence. But there's probably about 3-4 layers of fencing.
No, there's only one.
Pictured in the image.
No,
there's
only one fence.
Oh, there's a fence. No, there's a fence back behind them.
There's a fence that goes along the side. So
right
here. So she's here, and you might be seeing the fence that goes along the side in the background. Yes. But if you look at the depth of field, you see the little wrought iron fence behind her, and it looks like that thing's there. Now, originally, I said, okay, that's got to be an app, because you got these ghost apps now, and you can, sometimes if they're too perfect or they're too formed, it's like, okay, that's an app. But there was no way for someone to use an app and place it behind the fence, in between the fence and the headstones that are behind it that you don't get to see, because there are actually headstones behind it, because it's a jam-packed cemetery with headstones everywhere. So you don't see it because that thing is in the way. And there's no way for someone to have put, I don't think, an app in between the fence behind her, because this was a locked cemetery. We did not get in. She was standing on the outside of the gate.
Yeah, but what I'm seeing, when you really, really get this thing blown up, you can see through it and see to the fence running away from them. So the shadow is being cast by some very heavy lighting of above their heads, because there's a lot of very heavy lighting, and you've got a lot of lens flare because you got 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 3 lights right there around the speed limit sign. So you've got some really in-depth lighting. And looking at how the posts go to the ground, so you actually only have a small shadow area next to the lady's head. So I think what you're getting here is a little chiaroscuro, which is the play of light and dark. Okay. And you do have something. You've got but it's going to be even with her head, and that's really about all that is actually there. And that could very easily be something in the lighting. Because
now, there was another picture, which I don't have. One of the tour guides has it. There was another picture from another angle that showed the same thing standing there. And it was just a different...
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff we love to see, yeah.
All right, I'll have to get that and send it to you and maybe put it on the video, because I know that Charmaine, when she did the show, I think Toast and Charmaine both have that picture because those were pictures I did not take. I was not present when these were taken. These were actually taken by customers on the tour who sent it to the tour guide. So I was not there to take them personally. But I think they have the multiple pictures that were taken that depict this thing, because there's some that show a close, or maybe that's just a close-up that they sent me. In the original picture, she was further away. Maybe that was the situation. I'll have to find out.
I mean, just, I can see from at a distance, the shadowy figure is much more impressive. When you yank
like a little tiny Oogie Boogie.
Yeah, it does. It does.
It looks like Oogie Boogie. But
now, when you crank it up and get into the picture, because of course I'm using a little different software than the average bear. When you get it really cranked up, you can see the detail in the fencing, and you can see how one part of it is spilling into the other. The bigger you get it, the less anomalous it looks.
Well, that's anything though, because of the pixelation. I mean.
Oh no, not pixelated. No, you sent me a very good high resolution JPEG. So I mean, you can really get in there and see a lot of detail.
Okay.
So it's I can get down to seeing rust flakes on the fence, and I have to say it's much more impressive back than it is in tight.
Yeah, it's impressive, all right. Yeah. Now the other one I sent you, I initially sent you a few, but then at the last email I just sent you 3 with the explanations of what they were. And the other one I sent you, it's a little girl, and she's kind of smeared looking. It almost looks like she has vampire teeth. It's that funny looking picture, but clearly it's a little girl. And that picture was taken in total darkness in the back of the Charity Hospital Cemetery. And and again, I did not take the picture. This was something, either the tour guide took it or someone who was on the tour took it, but supposedly there were no children on the bus. So this thing appears, and initially to me it looked like maybe a kid there that moved. It looked like movement. The kid ran through the picture or something. But if you really look at it, it looks like she's got like little funny-looking little demon teeth or something. I don't know. It's like a little baby vampire, a little vampire.
I think most children look like that, though. So, and this one's going to have to fall into the anomalous. It's a fuzzy Bigfoot picture category of. There's enough detail here that it's obviously a person.
It's an awfully dressed up little girl, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, this
Even
is.
if there was a child on the tour, why would that child be dressed in a little dress? It's usually not a child that age that's going to be brought onto a scary tour out in a cemetery at night. I believe them when they say there was no child out there. So, of course, I believe a lot of things you don't believe. So anyway, I wanted to get your opinion about that.
That looks, for all the world of it, it looks like a digital effect.
Okay, and it could be an app for all I know. It could be an app with a digital effect. Because I have that possibility.
Because there is good detail in it. And you can see from the feet to the top of the head, dark hair. You can see where it looks like maybe she stepped and turned her head, or it could be a digital overlay. So
I haven't ruled out app because I know that there's apps out there, and the last class that I taught on ghost hunting, I got very frustrated trying to debunk pictures, looking up all the different apps and all the different things that they have on the apps, and it was like, oh my God, there's too many. There's no way to sit here and go through and find out what's an app and what's not.
Yeah, and that's that is both good and unfortunate for us.
I think it's unfortunate because
the good news is
fake stuff.
Yeah, well, the good news is we can now look at almost anything and say with some certainty, could have been faked. We've been able to do that from the beginning, but now with so much electronics out there, and the temptation, as we've said a million times, it is so much easier to fake it than make it.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know why, to me, I don't know why anybody would get any gratification out of faking it.
This is a cool picture. This is, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but being out of context and not knowing, without corroboration, and I'm looking at the stutter and not looking at the little girl. Ignore the little girl completely and just look at the photograph, and everything in the photograph is stuttered.
Okay.
The grass lines are stuttered. The grass lines to the bottom of the legs line up perfectly. They're all stuttered. This looks like a mosaic effect you'd put on something in Photoshop.
Okay. All right.
Because it's 100% consistent. It's 100% consistent throughout the entire photograph. So I would have to say, without accusing anyone of fakery, I'm going to have to say this is some kind of misfire in the camera. Like somebody did think they saw something and spun around real quick and tried to get a picture with a camera moving or maybe bumped or whatever, and it stuttered the picture.
We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some actual stories that people did see and experience some apparitions. So we'll be right back.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour. A tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. And it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about. The Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-333-3776. 2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spook house. This is real.
We're back now. We're going to change gears a little bit because we've had some stories come to us. Now, these are stories that did not come from people that were just on a tour. These are people I knew. These are people I've known for a very long time who have come and had these things, these experiences. And the first one was very, very, very eerie. This is a little old cemetery in New Orleans. And a very close friend of mine who passed away a few years ago called me up one day and he told me this story. And he said, I was walking through this cemetery and I stopped in there. I was like, okay, first off, why were you hanging out in a cemetery?
Well, yeah, there's a little.
Why were you in there? I'm kind of having a hard time to understand why you were just hanging out in a cemetery. But okay, go ahead. And he said, and he was a musician, and he said, well, I go there to think. It's quiet. And he said,
it is that.
And he lived right there, very close, in a close proximity to the area. And he said, it's a good place to go to. There's no people out there. I can go. I can think. I can meditate. It's a very quiet place. So it's get a little solace out there. It's like, okay, fair enough. Okay, that's why you're out wandering around the cemetery. And he saw a headstone. Well, it's actually on a wall vault. And it caught his eye because it was a very, very strange inscription. And it was a little boy, a little 10-year-old boy who had died. And underneath the child's name and the date of his birth and death, it said, Mother, I'm going out to play. And he was very disturbed by that because he said, surely that was the last thing that child said to his mother. That was the last thing his mother heard him say. And he says, I can't even imagine, being a parent and that's the last words that you hear from your child and then your child dies. Something happens. And he says, I really want to find out how this little boy died. He was really kind of obsessed with it. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. And I'm like, I don't understand what it is. He says, when I was there, he says, I felt compelled to touch the faceplate of the tomb. And he said, and when I did, he says, it was almost like an electrical surge came up through my arm. And I pulled my hand away real quick. And it kind of gave me the creeps. And I was like, okay. And he says, and then I started seeing this little boy after that. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night and this little boy would be standing there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. And I said, when did this happen? And he said, 20 years ago. I was like, okay, so you've waited 20 years to tell me this. And all of a sudden you're telling me, I was like, wait a minute. Why now? Why now? And he says, because I'm seeing him again and I don't know what he wants.
Okay.
And this really disturbed him. This disturbed him greatly. And he became very interested, and so did I, to finding out what happened to this little boy. And we couldn't find any kind of obituary, which is strange for a child. There should have been an obituary. There should have been a funeral. And he became to the point where he was thinking, maybe the child's not even in it. Maybe the child was never found. And he says, I wonder how we could find out. And I'm like, we're not pulling the faceplate off and opening up the tomb if that's what you're thinking, because that's not legal. We ain't doing that. So we sent off, because it had been over 50 years, we sent off for the death certificate. And I got the death certificate on the child, and I called him up. And when I gave him the address of where the little boy lived, he was like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. And I'm like, no, why? What is the significance of this? And he says, I lived a couple of doors down from there until I was 10 years old. Now, mind you, the time frame, I mean, this little boy died well before my friend was even born, but nonetheless, he lived a few doors down where the child grew up until he died. He lived there until he was 10 years old. Oh, wow, what a strange coincidence. So anyway, we did a little more investigating, and we talked to his father, and we said, well, if this kid lived here, on the death certificate, it said he drowned. And, his father said, well, the old canal that used to go up West End Boulevard, he says that was used. They would have grocery boats and barges and everything else. He says the kids would go out there and they would jump off of it. And he says kids drowned in it all the time. It was a very common thing. Because they would go and they'd get crazy and they'd go play in it. And it was like, oh, okay, maybe that's what happened. And maybe they never found him. Who knows? So anyway, it started becoming more and more frequent with him getting visitations from the kid. And he was really starting to get worried about it. And I was like, I don't know. I said, I guess in time you're going to find out maybe what he wants, what the significance is. And then after a while, he quit talking about it. And at some point in time, I actually got a visitation from him in a dream telling me he was getting ready to leave very soon. Well, long story short, he died several months later.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when he first started having this experience with these kids, I consulted with some of other fellow psychics and just kind of got their opinion on it. And what a lot of people thought was maybe this was some past life connection with him and this little boy. Or maybe he was even that little boy in the past life. Who knows? But there was some kind of a connection between him and the little boy. And it's almost as if the little boy came back and was waiting for him. I don't know. It's very eerie. It was very disturbing at the time. But he was very touched by these visitations from this child, and they were very significant to him. So, skeptic, what is your take on all that?
Well, I'll give you a personal story. In Memphis, Tennessee, many, many years ago, I was a manager of an electronics store. And, so employees kind of came and went. It was, not a great job, not a bad job, but, it was back in the days when you bought your cassette tapes and your VCRs and, phones had just been decentralized. So now you could buy your own phone and all that kind of stuff. So, welcome to the electronic shop of the day. And had a young man get hired by the company and get sent to my store. And after a few days of talking, we were both kind of like, oh, well, we're both from Houston. Well, that's kind of cool. What are the chances you bump into, out of a great big huge country of a couple of million people, you bump into somebody from Houston? Okay, well, that was fun. And then we got a little chatting a little more, and it turns out he grew up on Eddystone out in, this weird part of Houston off of Old Katy out near Chinatown. All right. I had to look at him funny and go, which end of that street did you grow up on? Because I don't remember you. Turns out he grew up about 12 houses down the street at the other end from me.
Wow.
So strange serendipity happens to us all in our lives, and especially in repeat communities like New Orleans. Because while New Orleans has a huge transit population of people that move in, people that move out, just like any other big city, New Orleans, like many other river cities, has that population that's there generation after generation after generation. I can think of at least 2 restaurants in the French Quarter. I visited sometime in the 80s. I visited sometime in the 90s. I visited sometime in the 2000s. And I remember the same staff, aging like me, being there.
Right.
And, that's just not...
People were alive. Now, bear in mind, this kid was deceased. So we're talking about him seeing a spirit that was no longer here, incarnate. So it's a little bit different.
I'm not so much on the I saw a spirit as I am the connection that, I grew up a few doors down from this person. I liked his grave. I looked it up. I'm just saying this is an old conversation for you and I, is that things that are very normal for you in New Orleans are very abnormal for people maybe living in Illinois. There are small towns where there are people that can drive you around the town and show you every house their family ever lived in. Well, that's where Mom and Pop grew up, and they sold that house back in the 50s, and the Jamesons bought it. And then we moved across town to this house, and then we just built this new house. You know, they can point out their whole lineage, what family members lived there, who went there. And when you have old neighborhoods like that, I think you're going to run into more of that. So I find it amazing that he got fascinated by a a final resting place of somebody that actually lived just a few doors down the street. So
there was no way for him to know this in advance. There was absolutely no
right.
And plus, he originally found this tomb 20 years before. So this is something that was occurring for him 20 years back, and then all of a sudden, he starts seeing this little boy in his room again. So he never went back to the cemetery. So that's the eerie part about the story. Is like, it's not like I see this tomb and I found this out. Okay, I saw this tomb and I found this out 20 years ago. The kid was visiting me 20 years ago. Now the kid's back, and now I'm scared. So,
once again, the power of the human mind, the power of the human mind to try to make sense of something that doesn't make sense.
Right.
People lost in a coal mine will tell you that, some figure from history they admired appeared to them out of the darkness and said, hang on a minute, they're digging over here to the left.
Oh, wow.
And, the next day, somebody hears sounds to the left, and, subconsciously, they probably already heard those sounds and gave themselves a paranormal pep talk, if you will.
Or maybe somebody in spirit showed up to reassure them and let them know.
Well, I'm just loving the math of being able to find this house.
What's that?
I said, I'm loving the math of just being able to find this house.
Yeah.
What were the chances? When you look at the math of probability, some of the things that happen are astounding.
Well, I think this is astounding simply because this was not just I ran across somebody who happened to live down the street, the same street I lived on until I was 10 years old. This was, I picked up a ghost in a cemetery and it follows me around. Now, 20 years later, it's come back. Oh, and by the way, this person grew up on the street I lived at until I was that person's age. And then he didn't find this out until 20 years later, of course, when I sent off for the death certificate. So, because at first, when it happened originally 20 years before, he was just kind of like, okay. And he didn't really give it a whole lot of credence until it started coming back, and that's when he felt that it was worth mentioning.
Well, and then as you said, his life came to an end.
Several months after,
within a relatively short period of time.
Well, right. So it was, I don't know. I thought it was very strange. I thought it was very, very strange. And that there was something very ominous about the whole situation of the child returning to visit him. The child never spoke. There was never any conversations, just seeing this child appear in his room at night. And, him, being terrified by this. And he was not somebody that was generally terrified over stuff like this. I mean, he'd had experiences before, and he, kind of shrugged him off. He believed, but he kind of shrugged it off. But, I mean, he was truly, he felt like it was some sort of bad omen at the time.
Well, it's hard to argue with how the results fell out, so.
Right. All right, so we're actually going to take a little break again because it's that time. And when we come back, we're going to find out why people tell you never take anything from a cemetery. Follow me, Kalila Smith, into the mysterious world of spirits. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, is a concise how-to manual for anyone who enjoys a good ghost hunt. Learn the history of spiritualism, learn what a ghost is and what is not. Learn the truth about poltergeist. We'll also delve into the realm of spiritual beings that never were human. the world of demons, real vampires, and we'll look at some real case studies. This is a must-have for everyone interested in ghost hunting, from the novice to the expert. Completely updated in its second edition, this is one of the first guides for ghost hunting based on actual first-hand experiences. Available on Amazon.com. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, by Kalila Smith. Okay, welcome back. So we have another scary story. This is even scarier than the one before, because many years ago, a guy that worked for me, he was very young at the time. He was probably maybe 19, 20. So this young guy worked for the company, and he happened to be at a cemetery, one of our local cemeteries, and several of our little cemeteries have places where either the tombs are crumbling, or, you know, one cemetery in particular, they don't even use coffins, and lots of times the bones will come up over there in Holt Cemetery. It's where a lot of people who can't afford expensive tombs have been buried, and for a few $100s, you could bury your loved one even there today, but everything's a la carte. So if you just say, I want my loved one buried, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get them in a hole in the ground.
Right.
You're going to put dirt on them, and that's it. So needless to say, there's many times you go through this particular cemetery, and you might see bones coming up, pieces of a skull, especially if it rains, because it happens. This is all in Mid-City, which is at the bottom of the bowl where we have all the flooding. Just a mild rain will turn it into a swamp. And that's basically what it is. It's a filled in, it's a drained swamp. Is what that area is. That's why it floods. So you get all kind of things. One time I was doing a bus tour out there, and we actually found just the whole bottom of a jaw just lying on the ground.
My goodness. So
that being said, this particular guy happened to be out one day, and he's roaming through the cemetery. And I mean, now this guy's a tour guide, so he's, maybe he's learning the cemetery tour, maybe he's just learning some of the history. He can, we tour guides go roaming through cemeteries sometimes, looking for material. Well, he happened upon a tomb that was broken open, and it was an above ground tomb. The bricks had crumbled, and he looked inside and he saw human bones. And in that moment, he got this really stupid idea that it'd be really cool to take some of those bones home and show it to the kids. Because he was, at the time, either newly married to a lady who already had kids, or they were getting married. And nonetheless, there were kids at home. And he thought, man, if I put these in my pocket, I can take these home, go show them to the kids, and they'll think it's kind of cool. So he does this, unbeknown to anyone but himself, and I got a call from this guy, like at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, waking me up. And now this is a big guy. Big, burly. He was a boxer, big, tough guy. And he's crying like a baby. And once I could compose myself, and after I yelled at him for waking me up, I was like, why are you calling me at this hour of the night? And he's crying like a baby. You have to help me. You have to help me. I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do. And I said, what did you do? And he because I had to know, because that's the kind of guy he was. Okay, this is the kind of one of these guys. I was like, okay, he did something. It's like, what did you do? And he tells me this story about how he went to the cemetery. And I said, oh man, I said, well, what is wrong now? And he says, well, I have this big black orb, and it's moving all over my ceiling. And every time I try to get out of bed, it's coming at me. And it won't go away. And I said, well, my friend, what you have to do, you need to get your little bag of bones, and you need to go get in your car, and you need to drive back out to the cemetery and sit in front of those cemetery gates all night long until those gates open. And when those gates open, you need to go back in, and you need to put those bones back. That's what you need to do, or you will see that thing again. So he did what he was told, and he went and put the bones back. And he never forgot, and he never took another thing from the cemetery, but he tells that story all the time to people, and, he laughed about it later, but, I mean, he was truly terrified, and he swears that there was this huge, dark, shadowy form, he called it a black orb, over his bed, and that every time he tried to get out of bed, it was charging at him. And I said, man, there's a reason we don't take things from the cemetery. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that there are spirits in the cemetery that have never been human, they will never be human, and they guard the burial grounds. In the voodoo tradition, they are called the Gede. And the head of the Gede is, of course, the Baron Samedi. And if you want to know who the Baron Samedi is, if you've seen Disney's The Princess and the Frog, and you see the kind of skeleton guy with the top hat, the magical guy, okay, he's depicted after the Baron Samedi. And he is a trickster. But this particular realm of spirits, their job is to do nothing but guard the burial ground. So when you take things and you desecrate graves, or you do disrespectful things, you take bones, it's their job to make sure that you do the right thing and go back and put it back where it belongs. You don't take things. So it's a common theme of, in my belief anyway, this was a guardian spirit doing their job. And like I told him, you either make it right or you will see that thing again. So now, Alan, do you really want to debunk these spirits? Go ahead, have at it.
Well, as somebody once said, all you try to do in a relationship is match up demons to see if they get along. Well, let's start with all the obvious. Let's start with it's a 19-year-old male. We already know bad, dumb things are just waiting to happen. There will be a litany of poor decision-making in his experience at any moment. All right, we're not going to argue that point in the slightest. So in this particular case, the should I say thick-headed decision made, like most decisions when you're that age, are this'll be cool.
That's exactly yeah.
That's somewhere right up there with watch this, hey y'all, or hold my beer.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to start with pretty much every religious belief on the planet that if you ain't got no business playing with parts of a dead body, you ain't got no business.
That's right.
I don't care which religion you are. I don't care what your belief system is. Fundamentally, the deceased is beyond the grasp of the average person.
It's taboo. You don't do it.
You
don't do it. It's not acceptable. It's disrespectful, and you don't do it.
And
not to mention, just from a physiological point of view, for those people who are tempted to do this, bones, it takes a long time for bone to decompose, so they could be a lot old, really, really old. But the thing is with bone tissue is that once it hits a certain age and that level of deterioration, they do become very toxic. So the dust on these bones and so forth, you can get sick from it. There's
a whole lot of reasons why this is a bad idea. Yeah, there's a whole lot of reasons why this just makes your head hurt going, oh, don't put your hand in there. Okay, so he does. He puts his hand in there, and by his own admission to his own thoughts, I just did something you're not supposed to do. And I think at that moment, you have mentally started dropping the dominoes that something is going to happen to you. Now, I'm not going to speak to spirits showing up, but I'm going to talk about spirits conjuring up in your head while you're trying to sleep. So you're asleep, and here comes that thought from 8th grade Bible study that you've stolen something.
Mm-hmm.
2, it's a human body part. It's not like you found some deer antlers walking in the woods. You mean, honestly, It's not like you found a turtle shell on the shore. It's not like you found some seashells. This is, perfectly good and well. It was in a grave. You reached your hand in a grave and came up with a human bone. And you got no business putting your hand in a grave or taking a human bone.
Right.
So I think we can pull the bus right up to psychological guilt right there. And, so we're, 19, 20, 21 years old. We're, I'm sure there's a libation or two that evening. I'm sure we had to show it to somebody. And I am positive somebody in that evening.
He showed it to somebody. You know he did.
He showed it to somebody. And in New Orleans especially, somebody went, oh, they're going to get you. And I'm going to open my eyes real wide for that one. They going to get you. So by the time he goes to bed that night, you already know you stole something. You done showed it to somebody and admitted you stole something. And now everybody done looked at you like, oh, they coming. They coming. I can just stop at psychology. I don't even have to address spirits and just kind of go, you were going to get a phone call. If not that day, within a day or two. Because here's what would have happened the next day. So let's say he slept through the night. But you got the bone is not only in your possession or in your house, it's probably on his person. Because once again, we said 19-year-old. So I'm running with that. The next day, he's coming down the steps and stubs his toe. And then he gets to work and he reaches for a coffee cup and he knocks it off the table. And now your brain is going to take those patterns and go, they're getting you. It's going to get worse. It's coming. And the fact that you forgot to pay your light bill for the last 2 months is probably now going to coincide with the day they turn off your lights. So I'm going to play. I'm going to play this one down to being a 19-year-old and probability, and how one decision, one tiny little, I'm going to turn right instead of left type decision can drastically affect your life. So I'm not even going to get to the orb because, I think we already got that handled. I don't think it matters if that orb was in his head or on the ceiling. It was in his head. Okay.
All right. We'll take it. I disagree, but we'll take it because we're running out of time, actually. As usual, this goes by so quick. So, I think that at this point we'll have to readdress these cemetery spirits in another episode, maybe in season 3, and revisit the cemetery spirits because there's lots more stories about this of stuff, where these came from. So, yes. So, for now, we're going to say goodnight because we've totally run out of time. And thank you all for joining us. Please go to our group, Scary Stories by Kalila. And I've also got a page you can like. And please check in with us. You can also friend us on Facebook, find us, and check in with us again next week for another episode. Good night.